Israel is about to be branded a criminal state by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. It's all about timing and hatred. I'll have the details and analysis coming up on In Focus. Chag Sameach. As we move into the final days of Passover, I interrupt our vacation to bring you the following news update. Last week, we received word that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court at The Hague, a man named Karim Khan, is imminently poised to issue international arrest warrants against Israel's top civilian and military officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, and others will follow shortly thereafter. Israel is going to be accused, these men specifically are going to be accused of starving the people of Gaza. That's what's on the plate. That's what we're dealing with. And I want to give a little bit of background and explain what the implications of this move are and what we should be looking forward to in the days to come and in the weeks and months, years to come as a result of what's happening today. So first of all, what is the International Criminal Court? There's a lot of confusion because there are essentially two international courts at The Hague in Holland. The first one is the International Court of Justice, and that august body of a kangaroo court opened up a trial against Israel for genocide 3 months ago in January, based on a complaint that was submitted by South Africa. And so that's the International Court of Justice. It's slightly more, clean or less toxic than the International Criminal Court, but all the same, it is a kangaroo court, and it is trying Israel for the crime of genocide, when in fact it's genocide that was enacted against us on October 7th. And that is the aspiration of Iran, as we saw on April 13th, and as we see every day. And it's the aspiration of Hezbollah, as we see every day. And that's, of course, the aspiration of Hamas and all of their allies and colleagues and partners in this. So our enemy's goal is to annihilate the Jewish people, and Israel is being accused of genocide, stands on trial for genocide at the International Court of Justice at The Hague. Now that brings us to the International Criminal Court. The ICC was established in 2000, around the time that the Palestinians blew up the peace process with Israel and began their terrorist war against Israel. And the ICC is a post-Cold War institution, and it's basically the brainchild of Iran and a lot of other third world country and Europeans who are post-nationalists that want international organizations to subsume nation states and force all of us to bend to the will of this class of international elites. So it was established by the Rome Treaty in 2000, and it is supposed to be responsible for trying people from all over the world for war crimes. Okay? And basically, the Rome Statute sort of gives it is an act of political warfare against the democracies of the world, because it sets up a judicial body that supposedly has the right to determine who is and isn't a war criminal, that essentially is a reflection of the United Nations General Assembly. And we know that the UN General Assembly is a madhouse, because what you have is an automatic majority of non-democratic, anti-Western states, which is why, there are 10,000 basically UN General Assembly resolutions that have been enacted over the past 40, 50 years against Israel, and claiming that we have no right to exist, that our national liberation movement, Zionism, is a form of racism, and so on and so forth. And everything that we ever do, including breathing in and out while Jewish in the land of Israel, is against the law. So that's the General Assembly. And the International Criminal Court is basically the General Assembly's judicial body. So it was born as a means to criminalize democracies under the aegis, basically under the umbrella of justice, while wearing the robes of a judicial body, but it's a political body, just like the UN General Assembly is a political body. It's not a judicial body, and its purpose overall was to give judicial powers to the General Assembly, which under the UN Charter has no powers whatsoever. It's just a debating society that puts out papers that have no legal bearing on anything. So that's basically what the ICC is. That's how it was conceived by the framers of the ICC that included states, again, like Iran. So that's the ICC. And initially, because lawyers love law and they love courts, Israel's sort of brain-dead jurists, who, of course, still lord over us today, but that's a separate story, they all wanted us to sign the Rome Statute, the Rome Treaty. And in fact, back then, Prime Minister Ehud Barak was about to sign it and bring it to the Knesset for approval when the jurists in the United States said, don't you dare, don't do this because it's dangerous, because it's this, because it's that. And so I think Barak may have actually initially signed it and then removed his signature, and it was never brought to the Knesset for approval. In the United States as well, President Clinton initially wanted to sign it, and then the Senate said there's no way that we're going to ratify this treaty, and it sort of died. In the United States and in Israel, when people started waking up to the alarm bells sounding that this was going to be an anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Israel body. Okay, so that's the UN's creation of the International Criminal Court. It's a political body that pretends to be a judicial body. Until now, it's been totally a failed institution. They've only really gone after Black African leaders, some or people who are considered politically toxic, like Slobodan Milosevic and others. But then after they did the Yugoslavian thing with the Serbs, they then went after a bunch of Black African leaders, and they were accused of racism and picking at the lowest hanging fruit. They recently sent out an arrest warrant for Putin, and nobody cares because, he's Putin. But Israel's a different story. So the ICC officially began building momentum towards criminalizing the Jewish state in 2009, I believe it was, when under with the support effectively of Barack Obama, the PLO, in material breach of all of the treaties that it signed with Israel, applied for membership as Palestine. All of the treaties that the PLO signed with Israel explicitly prohibit them. They accepted this. They agreed that they would not apply for membership as a state pending the arrival at a final arrangement, final peace treaty with Israel. You can't pretend to be a state when you're not a state. So in 2009, the PLO applied for recognition as statehood. They signed the Rome Treaty, and they say, here, we want to be a member of the ICC. And that began a long process under which Palestine, unlawfully, in breach of international law, but, who cares, it's Israel, is a member. And that, even though Israel isn't a signatory on the Rome Treaty and has not agreed to jurisdiction of the ICC over anything that it does, because the ICC recognized Palestine as a state, it gave the ICC effective jurisdiction over Israel because Palestine is recognized as a state. So the PLO and all of the NGOs that work with it to criminalize Israel, to delegitimize our right to exist, to demonize us, etc., began deluging the ICC with unsubstantiated, false, libelous allegations against Israel that we're committing war crimes by, again, breathing in and out while Jewish in Judea and Samaria, operating at any level in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. So this has been building up for years. And during the Trump administration, the ICC opened investigations also against U.S. servicemen, or allegations of war crimes against the United States military forces operating in Afghanistan and in Europe in relation to the war in Afghanistan. And Donald Trump rightly said, no way. And he issued an executive order, I think in 2018, which said that if any American serviceman or member of the services of an allied government, including Israel, Taiwan, and others, South Korea, Japan, etc., NATO allies, is a subject of proceedings at the ICC, then the United States will enact sanctions against ICC personnel, deny them visas to the United States, freeze their bank accounts, deny their immediate family members entrance to the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So this was basically a counter-assault against the ICC. Don't you dare lay a finger on the United States or any of our allies, because if you do, this is what's going to happen to you. So the United States, so in 2021, Karim Khan came in, and he's a British national. He's from Pakistan, family originally from Pakistan. And Khan was selected to be the new chief prosecutor of the ICC with American support because there was a deal that he would close the investigations against the Americans. So he came in a month after Joe Biden came into office in February of 2021. And the first thing that he did was that he closed those 2 investigations against U.S. servicemen. And Joe Biden then canceled Trump's executive order that would have sanctioned ICC personnel. So that went on. And then, this whole time that Biden has been advancing policies that are pro-Palestinians, pro-Iranian, anti-Israel since coming into office, the ICC has stepped up its investigations of Israel. All right, so that's what's been going on. And then since October 7th, again, they have been just inundated with these spurious complaints, these complaints without legal merit or evidence by the PLO, by Palestine, by NGOs claiming that Israel is committing war crimes. It's along the lines of the genocide that Israel is accused of committing at the ICJ. So, and it was a question, okay, well, you can't investigate because there's a war on, and Israel isn't a member of the ICC, so we don't have to participate, and we won't participate in this kangaroo investigation against us. And, and so what they're saying is that with no evidence, no testimony, no ability to check, and also with the violated party, with the accused party not even being a member of the ICC, we now have a situation where the speed of light from a legal perspective, from the perspective of if this were an actual judiciary body, you have Karim Khan saying, it was the arrest warrants against Israel's leaders are supposed to come out on April 29th. Now they may be delayed until like May 1st or something like that, but that they are, it's that the chamber is loaded and that bullet is about to go off, and they're going to do this. And so what are the implications? Okay, now that we've given the background, what is the ICC? What are the implications of the issuance of these international arrest warrants against top Israeli leaders? For the leaders themselves, and again, this is going to start with the 3 that I mentioned, with Netanyahu, Gallant, and Halevi, but it's going to very quickly again, have this cascade effect where you're going to have, brigade commanders, division commanders, perhaps individual soldiers that are also fingered as war criminals, and you'll have international arrest warrants against them. And the worst part about it is that they can also do a sealed arrest warrant, so that you don't know that there's an arrest warrant standing against you, and you get on a plane to go on vacation in London or in Paris or any of the 120 member states that are signatories to the ICC convention. And as soon as you land, you are arrested by this ICC international arrest warrant, and you had no idea that you were even, going to be seeing this. So this is actually a means to kidnap Israeli officials and bring them to The Hague by this kangaroo court, by this political entity that calls itself the International Criminal Court that Israel is not a member of. So first of all of these leaders of Israel, all of these military personnel in Israel, all of these civilian elected leaders and otherwise, now anytime that they want to travel out of Israel to a country that is a signatory on the Rome Convention, they're going to have to first receive the explicit agreement of the host government that they're traveling to, that they won't be arrested upon landing. We've had things like this happen on a bilateral level against individual Israeli leaders, like, for instance, a former commanding officer of the Southern Command, Doron Almog, about 15 years ago, was traveling on a fundraising trip to London, and he and El Al was tipped off, or Israel, the embassy was tipped off, that based on a complaint against him in a British court by an anti-Israel pro-Hamas NGO, they were going to issue an arrest warrant against him, and they were going to arrest him in London. So he never left the plane. He stayed on the plane. He never entered Britain officially, and he flew back to Israel on the same plane that he flew out on. And that was a huge deal. And that was the beginning of this cascade that now we're going to see officially with the ICC going after all of our soldiers, all of our officers, and all of our elected officials with this initial issuance of these arrest warrants. So that's one thing. So that's terrible for everybody who serves in the IDF. And the larger implication of this is that it criminalizes us, right? It means that every Israeli citizen, every Israeli soldier, every Israeli official, every Israeli elected leader is now going to be branded as an actual war criminal or as a potential war criminal or as an accused war criminal. And Israel itself is going to be branded as a criminal state whose armed forces are a criminal organization, a terrorist organization, if you will, an organization that deliberately starves people, that is carrying out a genocide, according to the South African complaint to the International Court of Justice, etc. So that Israel is being criminalized as a state that is a criminal entity. So what that means is that if you're saying that Israel's military is a criminal organization and our leaders are criminals and our soldiers are criminals and all of these things, and what you're saying is that Israel doesn't have a right to self-defense. Now, when you take a step back and see what are we defending ourselves against, and you recognize the nature of Hamas, you recognize the nature of Iran, you recognize the nature of Hezbollah, and all of their associated with the Houthis and the Shiite militia in Iraq and in Jordan and in Syria, etc., and of course the Palestinian Authority itself, the supposed the fake Palestinian state, all of its security forces that are assaulting Israelis both inside of Judea and Samaria and directing missile assaults and shooting assaults against the Sharon area of Israel, abutting places like Tulkarm. So all of these groups, all of these entities, all of these terrorist regimes are dedicated to annihilating Israel, to annihilating the Jewish people. That's in all of their charters. That's what they're all committed to doing. And in fact, their actions, whether it's sponsorship, funding, training, whatever of these terrorists like Iran, and directly attacking Israel with April 13th attack of ballistic and cruise missiles and drones, and developing nuclear weapons, at least two of the missiles the ballistic missiles that Iran deployed against Israel on April 13th are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. So you have this annihilatory threat not only hanging over our head, but actually being advanced today in this war. And what you're saying is that Israel, when faced with this, is a criminal state and has no right to exist. So when you're facing enemies that are determined, are committed, have the declared goal of annihilating you, and in fact are carrying out actions in order to advance that aim, then what you're saying is that it is the position of the international community as expressed by the International Criminal Court, which is essentially the repository of the will of nations as expressed by the UN General Assembly and other bodies of the United Nations, that Israel should be destroyed, that it is a reasonable goal, it is an acceptable goal, it is legitimate to seek the annihilation of the Jewish state, because Israel doesn't have a right to self-defense, because we are criminals, because our leaders are criminals, because our military leaders are criminals, because our soldiers are criminals, according to Khan and his ilk. Now, that's of course all happening, and we have to remember, right, that this isn't happening either just in some isolated enclave called Israel or Gaza. This is happening in the midst of a tsunami of unprecedented assaults on Jews throughout the world. We had a Jewish woman in Paris who was kidnapped and raped and held hostage until she was able to escape by a Muslim terrorist who said that he was acting on behalf of the Palestinians. Just last week in Paris, this happened, right? You have calls to globalize the Intifada being sounded from Columbia and Harvard and Yale and Northwestern and Berkeley, USC, UCLA, all of these campuses around the country. And you have campus administrators who are enabling it. You know, at the beginning of the war, right after October 7th, the Jewish students at Harvard asked to raise the flag of Israel in Harvard Yard, and the administration refused to allow them to fly the Israeli flag in Harvard Yard, even though after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Harvard administration placed the Ukrainian flag in Harvard Yard. They were the ones who put it up. And here the Jewish students asked to put up the Israeli flag after October 7th, and their request was rejected. Well, yesterday, on April 27th, the Hamas people at Harvard Yard put up the Palestinian flag, and it's not going anywhere. And the administrators aren't blocking it, just as they're not blocking any of the pogroms going on anywhere in any of these campuses. And of course, it's not just in the campuses; it's all over the place. Jews are being assaulted on the streets in all the major cities in the Western world. And again, we've never seen anything like what's happening in America before, and it's happening. And Joe Biden and his White House can't even bring themselves to give a full-throated condemnation of what's going on. They keep saying on the one hand, on the other hand, it's terrible. And you also have to understand the Palestinians. That's what Joe Biden said just last week in some mealy-mouthed BS condemnation of what's happening on the college campuses. So the White House isn't doing anything about it. And, I just want to say, I'm getting allergies, so it looks like I'm crying, but it's just my eyes watering. Anyway, the nature of this, we have to understand, as we see this anti-Semitic tsunami throughout the Western world unfolding and threatening the lives of Jewish people all over the Western world, first and foremost, the United States, where we've never seen anything like this before, right? Is that the indictment of Israel as a criminal state is outrageously anti-Semitic. I mean, outrageously, like crazy anti-Semitic. These people are just vituperative nut jobs who hate Jews. How do we know this? Because, Omar Bashir, the dictator in Sudan, who actually did carry out genocide, right? Who killed tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of his fellow Sudanese because they were the wrong race or religion. It took the ICC years, decades to put out an arrest warrant against him. They didn't want to. They finally had to, blah, 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 blah. And, still he's running free and blah, blah, blah. Here, it took them, 5 minutes, right? This isn't about evidence. This isn't about anything. This is about a blood libel. This is a blood libel. This is a libelous claim against the state of Israel and its elected leaders and its army. It's people's army. It's the people's army. These are our children who serve in the IDF. We served in the RDF in our day. Yeah. So why is this happening? What does it all mean? Well, first of all, it's the timing. Timing is everything, right? We have two reserve brigades that have been called up to carry out the strike in Rafah, and it's imminent. They're standing outside of Gaza waiting for the green light to go in. Everything's planned, everything's been approved, and it's just a matter of getting the green light. So suddenly, as they're being called up for emergency service again, these are guys who served, 135 days of reserves after October 7th. They were the ones who carried out the major ground operation in the rest of Gaza and have been waiting to be called back to go to Rafah, and now they've been called back and they're waiting to go in. All right, so it's imminent, it's been approved, it's going to happen. So the point here is to say to Netanyahu, to say to Gallant, to say to Halevi, to say to all of the brigade commanders, all of the division commanders, if you do this operation, you will be branded as war criminals. You will not be able to leave Israel without getting prior consent from the country that you're going to visit, that they're not going to arrest you, et cetera, et cetera. So and then you have all of these sweeteners to try to make capitulation to this blackmail look like you're doing something right. So we have this Egyptian offer. The Egyptian offer is essentially capitulate to Hamas's demands for a hostage for terrorist swap, which would require Israel to essentially end the war in defeat, allow Hamas to prosper and to rebuild, et cetera, et cetera. And if you go into Rafah, everything has to be coordinated with us. And most importantly, you're not allowed to see all of the massive smuggling industry that we've been carrying out for Hamas, with Hamas for years. The Egyptian military has along the border between Gaza and Egypt. It's what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is the southern tip of Rafah, which is the international border. So the Egyptians are saying, if you operate in Rafah, you can't cause any deaths to any civilians, and you're not allowed to seize the international border. That has to remain under Hamas control, which is insane. But that's what the Egyptians are saying, and they're supposedly our friend, right? I mean, I don't even understand why we're talking to them. Egypt is abrogating international law with U.S. support when they're not allowing the people of Gaza to leave through that international border and seek refuge in third countries. Instead, they're forcing Israel to accept the burden of an enemy population that is dedicated to its annihilation, and we're responsible for them. Okay, that's what they're saying. And in fact, Assisi, Egyptian president Assisi, who owes his position in the world to Israeli support when he, as the head of the Egyptian military, ousted the Muslim Brotherhood from power in 2013, even though they were supported by the United States. Israel understood how terrible the Muslim Brotherhood regime in Egypt was going to be, that we supported the Egyptian military conducting a coup against them, and then Netanyahu and the Israeli government used all of our leverage in Washington in order to convince the Obama administration, which supported the Muslim Brotherhood, to renew military sales to Sisi's government. And if that hadn't happened, and if the United States hadn't supported them economically, then the coup would have failed, and Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood would have been in charge of Egypt again. So he owes everything to us. It was Israel that supported his war, enabled him to fight Daesh, ISIS in the Sinai successfully, and we even allowed him to breach the peace deal with Israel by deploying tanks to Sinai, which is total breach of the peace treaty with Israel, because the Sinai is supposed to be demilitarized. But we viewed him as an ally, and now in our hour of need, he is acting as Hamas's protector and its ally. So Sisi comes in with this offer, right, which means Israel capitulates. And the hostage deal also is a humiliating defeat. And he's pushing it. The Americans are pushing it. Obviously, anything that will cause Israel to capitulate, the United States is behind. So that's there. And then they have this fake peace offer on the table that if we capitulate, if we don't fight Hamas to victory, if we allow Hamas to survive this war, then Saudi Arabia is going to make peace with us. Now, this is stupid. This is a lie. How do we know it's a lie? It's a lie because the reason why Saudi Arabia was even interested in normalizing its relations with us is because Israel was seen as a strong horse, because we were winning, because we were defeating everybody, because we were stronger than everybody, because we were fighting Iran. And that's what drew Saudi Arabia to us. And so now they're saying, well, if you capitulate to Iran and to its terror nexus, first and foremost, right in front of your face, Hamas and Rafah, and also don't fight in Lebanon, and don't take any offensive action against Iran's nuclear installations, which you just showed you can do a week and a half ago. So they're saying that now Saudi Arabia is going to normalize its ties with Israel. What does Israel have to do in order to do this? We not only have to allow Hamas to win, we also have to support the establishment of a Palestinian terror state that will, in fact, annihilate Israel eventually, because that's what these people lived for, right? And so they're saying that Saudi Arabia is going to normalize its ties with an Israel whose days are numbered. It just beggars belief. But basically, the idea is that Saudi Arabia gets a civilian nuclear reactor from America, and then they can have a pretend nuclear project that's supposed to give them deterrence against Iran or some such. And you're going to get enough GOP senators to vote in favor of this treaty, a mutual defense treaty between Saudi Arabia and the United States, to get it passed before the election. So Biden will win because he's a peacemaker, and Israel will be defeated, and Saudi Arabia will get a mutual defense pact with the United States that won't even be worth the paper it's written on, but whatever. And they're going to get some sort of, nuclear hop gun that will produce nuclear power that they don't need and will not allow them to develop a nuclear weapon, just by the way, as happened with South Korea. But I guess MBS is dumb enough to think that this is a good idea for him. And so he wants to capsize Israel in order to get this, because that's what Biden wants. And he's apparently been convinced that this is a good idea, but I don't know why. Anyway, so those are supposed to be the sweeteners: a fake normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, or being nice to Egypt and getting a couple of hostages back, but the bulk of them remain in Gaza behind, and we've lost. So that's what we can get. And if we don't, then we go into Rafah, and our leaders are branded as war criminals. Israel is branded as a criminal state. And all this, again, as anti-Semitism is raging throughout the United States, enabled by the United States government. So what are the consequences of this move, right? The consequences of this move are that are sort of, the opposite, apparently, of what Biden and Samantha Power and all the rest of them have an idea about. Because if you're going to brand us as war criminals, and what do we have to lose? We'll fight to win. We'll fight to win not only in Gaza, we'll fight to win in Iran, we'll fight to win in Lebanon. Like this, you're not giving us any choice. I mean, if you're going to shoot us, then we don't have anything anymore to gain from pretending that your investigations are legitimate or that your allegations of us have some credibility. There's no point. You've already sealed our fate, said that we have no right to exist. So now the point is just survival. It's not being nice. We're already isolated. You're telling us that we're a criminal state? Fine. Okay. We're still going to have to win because we're still in a war for our very survival. And if we don't win it, without your support, we're still, our survival will be in even greater peril than it was on October 7th. So, of course, we have to fight to win. And by the way, these arrest warrants seal the deal. You have no more collateral, okay? You're gonna stop sending us weapons. What do we care? You've already given an imprimatur to this branding of Israel. So, with a yellow star, right? That's what it is. So, it guarantees that we're gonna win. I mean, absolutely. So maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. And then it ends all chance. Exactly the opposite of what they claim. Branding Israeli leaders and soldiers as war criminals ends any chance of actually reaching that sought-for Saudi-Israeli peace deal that Biden thinks is going to win in re-election. Why? Because if Israel is branded as a criminal state, how could any Saudi leader today or in the future ever agree to open, normal relations with the Jewish state? They can't. There's literally no way that they will ever normalize relations with Israel if we're branded as a criminal state. And by the way, of course, it puts our formal treaties of peace with Egypt and Jordan at risk, because how can they possibly maintain even formal peaceful relations with a criminal state? So this destabilizes the entire Middle East. It destroys the peace process or the peace that exists or existed on October 6th completely. This is Iran's dream, right? You criminalize Israel, no Arab can have normal relations with the Jewish state anymore. So that it just capsizes everything that has been achieved over the past 50 years in terms of a peaceful resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and forget about the Palestinians. No hostages will be released, right? Joe Biden says that he wants hostages released. Emmanuel Macron wants hostages released. Everybody wants hostages released. Well, if this goes forward, none of them will. Why? What possibly can empower Hamas more than an official act criminalizing the Jewish state for fighting him? Nothing. This is the biggest gift that you can give to Hamas, right? The biggest. Sealed in a bow of the ICC, saying that Israel is a criminal state, that our soldiers, not Hamas, not the Hamas terrorists who slaughtered and raped 1,200 Israelis, who have been carrying out a war for genocide against Israel since they were founded in 1988. They're not the ones branded as criminals. Israelis are. We are. Our soldiers are. Our commanders are. Our political leaders are. And we're a democracy. So that means that the Israeli people are branded as criminals. The Jewish people are branded as criminals. That's what it's doing. This is like, the Nuremberg laws of the 1930s of the Nazis that they put together, over 5 years or something, in one fell swoop. It means all Jews are criminals. That's what it says. All Jews in Israel, all Jews who support Israel outside of Israel, we're all criminals. That's what it does. And so what gives a bigger shot of adrenaline to Hamas than that? Nothing. So you're sealing the fate of the hostages by enabling this. And then, of course, it creates a precedent. You think that this isn't going to be used against the United States. It's not going to be used against Britain. Of course, this precedent is going to be used against all Western nations that seek to fight, savage foes and terrorists. It's just going to happen. It has to happen because that's the whole point. Israel is the canary in the coal mine. And this isn't just a war against the Jews, although it is a war against the Jews. It's a war against the free world. What do the jihadists want? It's not, you have to listen to them. Not only, in Iran, where they, cry out death to America, death to Israel every day. But on Columbia campus, on the South Lawn of Columbia at Harvard Yard, what are they calling for? They're not just saying death to Israel. They're saying death to America. Why? Because it always starts with the Jews, and then it ends with a world war where millions and millions and millions of people who aren't Jewish end up getting killed. Why? Because it's the same thing. We are we're the commando unit for human freedom, right? And then you have the free people who followed us, and that's America. So this is it. You want Israel to be criminalized? You accept the criminalization of Israel because you have some crazy ideological idea or some crazy electoral strategy that ignores Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and all the Jews who vote there, right, with the narrow margins of victory, all of that because you want a bunch of jihadis in Dearborn, Michigan to vote for the president for re-election. I mean, for whatever reason, you're going along with this criminalization of the Jewish people and the Jewish state, it's going to boomerang against the American people like that. Trump gets elected, Biden gets elected, anything that you do, you're going to find yourself under the same situation. Why? Because that's how it works. It's a gravitational force. Finally, it's going to break. We have a dam, right? That's basically bursting. The dam has sort of blocked the flood of anti-Semitism from inundating the free world since the end of the Holocaust, since 1945. It's already almost broken, and whatever remaining, remnants of the dam are just going to be totally obliterated if this goes through. So the United States was always the one country that wasn't, inherently or reflexively anti-Semitic in the Western world, and the Europeans kept that at bay. But if Israel is criminalized, if we're a criminal state, if our people are criminals, if Jews are criminals because we want to survive and we're trying to fight foes that are annihilating us, then that's the end of that. Then America becomes an anti-Semitic state. And by the way, I think it's really important, although I hate even bothering because it's so obvious that this is a slander. But, I had John Spencer on the show, the head of the Urban Warfare Department at West Point, and you have Colonel Richard Kemp, who was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. They have, looked into this, detailed reports and analysis that show that Israel is completely on board. We're totally, abiding by the laws of war. There's no truth to any of this. The Hamasniks who surrendered to Israel in Gaza, not only are they not starving, many of them are overweight. None of them are skinny. The only people who are emaciated in Israel, in Gaza, are the hostages. We saw, Hamas has been doing the psychological warfare operation, and they put out videos of 3 hostages, all, of course, American citizens, but Hirsch Goldberg Colin, whose arm was blasted off on October 7th when he was at the Nova Music Festival. So he was the first video, and you see he has sores all over his face, and he's totally emaciated. Why does he have sores? Because he's, we know from the hostages that were already released that they had lice infest, their whole bodies were infested with lice from the top of their heads to the bottom of their toes. And you get sores, you get visible sores, and you look at Hirsch's forehead and it's all full of sores. Why? Because he's not getting treatment and he's emaciated. He has vitamin deficiency. He's not being fed, and he doesn't have medical care, and he's not, and this is the plight of all of the hostages that are still alive in Gaza. They are being starved to death. They're being denied medical care. And yet we hear this, Israel is the one starving. The only people who are starving are the ones that are being held by Hamas, the hostages. So, we have to realize that, who's really responsible for what's happening? Who is that stands behind this whole thing? Well, obviously the ICC, as I said, it was conceived as an anti-American, anti-Israel organization whose goal was to advance the political end of criminalizing Israel and the United States. We have to realize that this claim, particularly of the starvation, it wasn't born in a vacuum. And the people who have been promoting this all along have been President Biden and his top officials. And I just want to, if you remember, and we've talked about this really since October 7th, that already in the initial statements that President Biden and Tony Blinken made after the massacre, after the invasion, They expressed profound empathy and support for Israel, and they pledged military, equipment and arms and all the rest of it, and that the United States stood with Israel. But at the same time, already in their earliest statements, they started gaslighting Israel. They started saying to Israel, you better hold on, you better maintain your allegiance to the international humanitarian law, as if we were from the outset suspects. We were under suspicion that we were going to be war criminals. And so the United States put this out already, mamash, in the hours after October 7th. And here I'll just give you an example from a speech that the second statement that Biden made after October 7th. He says on October 10th, he begins a statement from, I think, the Situation Room or something, and he talks again, I empathize, we stand with Israel, we support Israel, etc. And then he says this: I just got off the phone with the third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I told him if the United States experienced what Israel is experiencing, our response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. Okay. We also discussed how democracies like Israel and the United States are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule of law. Terrorists purposely target civilians, kill them. We uphold the laws of war, the law of war. It matters. There's a difference. Why did he say that? Israel hadn't done anything. Why would he be pointing a finger at us saying, you better, mind the rules of law? Because he was setting us up. He was setting us up. Blinken was setting us up. Samantha Power was setting us up. All of the senior officials, Jake Sullivan was setting us up. All of them, the same wagging finger saying, you better abide by international law. And again, Spencer, Kemp, and anybody else who has even a modicum of intellectual honesty are saying explicitly, not only is Israel maintaining absolute rigid allegiance to the laws of war, it's taking on obligations to the civilians of Gaza that don't exist under international law. That is, the protection that Israel is offering civilians goes way beyond what it's required to protect them under international law. Okay? And yet here is Biden from the outside warning us, we will not accept if you don't abide by law. Why are you saying this? Because you're setting Israel up. Right? And what is this starvation thing? Where is that coming from? Well, what was the American initial demand against Israel, right? Aside from this law thing, humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid, you got to get it in. You got to get it in. They're not getting enough. You need more. You need more. You need more. Just last week, Biden signs the aid deal for Israel, and he said it gives $1 billion to Gaza, and we have to surge. We're going to surge. He said it, repeated it twice. He said it twice. Surge aid, surge. We're going to surge it. And again, with the finger pointed at Israel. Israel better not do anything to block the aid. What do you want from us? Why are you saying this? Why are you spending $200 million to build a port for a bunch of terrorists? And then forcing Israel to commit our own forces to protecting this thing. Why? They're not starving. They're not hungry. They are selling the U.S. MREs for pennies in open markets because they are inundated with food. They don't need it. They're complaining that, you're bringing us, expired Skittles from your MREs. What are you doing? They're complaining. And meantime, Hirsch and the other hostages are starving to death. They're starving to death. All right? So Samantha Power, what did she do? I wrote about this in The Age of the Blood, The Triumph of the Blood Libels. It came out at the end of March. So she makes a statement along with Josep Borrell, the anti-Semitic EU Commissioner for Foreign Affairs. So Samantha Power said that we were deliberately inducing famine in northern Gaza. This is what she said. She says famine is imminent in northern Gaza. And then she blamed the imminent famine on Israel. She said the U.S. will continue to do everything we can to get food to the people of Gaza, but Israel must do more to put an end to this mass and preventable suffering. So if it's preventable and we're not doing enough, that means that we're deliberately starving them. So this is a blood libel, right? That is being propagated by Biden, by his administration, by his top officials, that Israel is deliberately starving people who are overweight, okay, who are starving our hostages. So this is something I don't want to say, although Amit Segal, Israel's top political reporter, said he spoke to a senior source or senior sources at the ICC at The Hague last week, and he reported that these senior officials at the ICC itself told him that Karim Khan wouldn't dare to proceed with the prosecutions if they hadn't received first a green light from the Biden administration, that it wouldn't dare to do this. They're only doing it because the Biden administration green-lighted it. And of course they chose starvation because this is the slander that the Biden administration has been advancing against Netanyahu, against the Israeli government, against the Israeli army for months. So what does all this mean? It means that really the only person who can stop this is Biden himself. If Biden has enabled this thing to go forward, that, Khan is imminently going to issue these international arrest warrants that brand the state of Israel and the Jewish people as criminal and deny us the right to self-defense and therefore give an international community's imprimatur to the annihilation of the Jewish state, then, he's also the one who can stop it. He can say to Karim, he can reissue Trump's executive order that places sanctions on Karim Khan and his immediate family members, and all of the bureaucrats at the ICC have been preparing this scurrilous, this unsubstantiated allegation, this slander of Israel and our leaders. He can end it by threatening, by in fact saying that they will be sanctioned if they go forward with this. He can do that, Senator Cotton, the great Tom Cotton from Arkansas, he had already in February 23, after Biden canceled Trump's executive order, he essentially rewrote the executive order as a bill, and he put it forward, and the Democrats tabled it. And he's reintroducing it to the Senate, essentially saying that if you mess with the United States or any of its allies, including Israel and their armed forces, then we were going to sanction you. And a House version is going to be put forward this week by Representative Chip Roy and others. And so they're going to push this through. I don't know that it has a chance of getting passed in the Democratic-controlled Senate and under the circumstances. Who knows? But they're putting it forward. It's important to put pressure on the White House. The Pentagon has to, I would expect that for them to be opposed to this because this places U.S. Soldiers at immediate risk. Even the soldiers who are the Marines who are building this terrible port for Hamas in Gaza, they were shelled by mortars by Hamas last week. Why? Because they're the great Satan. That's why, because Hamas hates them, just like Iran hates them. They're coming to protect Hamas, and Hamas wants them all dead. Anyway, so, it's very important that Biden come in, but I personally am not at all optimistic that that's happening. I think that this is going to happen. Again, the bullet's in the chamber, whether it gets pulled this week or next week or next month or around November 7th, anybody's guess. But the arrest warrants are there. They'll be sealed and they'll come out, when it's politically advantageous for the ICC. And we have to operate under that assumption from now on going forward. So the question is what is this going to do for Israel? And so I think Netanyahu, is a person to look for here. And first of all, I want to read a tweet that he published on Friday afternoon, where he responded to the reports that that he's going to have an arrest warrant put out against him and his colleagues, etc. And he said, under my leadership, Israel will never accept any attempt by the ICC to undermine its inherent right to self-defense. The threat to seize the soldiers and officials of the Middle East's only democracy and the world's only Jewish state is outrageous. We will not bow to it. Israel will continue to wage to victory our just war against genocidal terrorists, and we will never stop defending ourselves. While the ICC will not affect Israel's actions, it would set a dangerous precedent that threatens the soldiers and officials of all democracies fighting savage terrorism and wanton aggression. So, just a word about Netanyahu. We have to remember, he is standing trial. He's been standing trial now for 3 years. He was the subject of a legal witch hunt, very much like almost a precursor of what the Americans are doing against Trump, beginning in 2015, 2016. He was indicted in the middle of an election season in 2019 for the purpose of making him lose, right? And they started the trial while he was out of power, I think, while Naftali Bennett, the usurper, had become prime minister with six mandates in the Knesset. And all of the charges against him, he has 3 counts that he's under indictment for. They've all fallen apart. And, the defense hasn't even rested its case yet. Not the defense, the prosecutor haven't even rested yet. The whole thing, what was left of the final charge, collapsed last week under the investigation of under the cross-examination of the police investigator who oversaw the investigation of Netanyahu. And, it's all nothing. But the thing is that they didn't indict him with the expectation that he was going to go to trial. They are at the trial because Netanyahu wouldn't bow to them. They thought that the minute that he was indicted or under threat to be indicted, he would resign from politics and go gently into that good night. And he didn't. He said no. Now, it's his personal interest. It was in his personal interest, in the interest of himself and his wife and his family. Just walk away. Why would he go through this whole thing? Why would he undergo this torturous process of being and humiliation, of being reviled as a zealot, everybody getting to call him a criminal, and having these riots outside of his home and denying him any sort of tranquility in his life, and claiming that and branding him as a criminal here at home for imaginary offenses that he never carried out? Because he's a patriot, because he believes that he has to lead Israel, because he's the best person to lead Israel. And that's why he won't abandon the fight. That's why he didn't abandon politics. So if you think that some anti-Semitic kangaroo court at The Hague is going to dissuade him from moving forward to victory, it's like people just don't understand who this man is. You indict him and he stays up. He doesn't care, because he's not here for himself. If he were here for himself, he wouldn't have run in 2022. He wouldn't have. Why would you? Who needs this crap? I don't think I would have if I were in his position. Would you? Look at what he's spent on. Just like people can't understand Trump, and people say, why are you doing this, Mr. President? Why? This is because I love America. It's the same thing with Netanyahu. So you can't keep him down. You're not going to intimidate him into standing down. We have our brigades outside of Rafah. All you're doing is saying, okay, go forward to Rafah. If you have to choose between Riyadh and Rafah, as Tom Friedman, the brilliant idiot of the New York Times, who's the mouthpiece for the Biden White House, and so he's giving you a deal that you can't refuse, right? You're gonna be a war criminal, or you're gonna be a peacemaker. Ha ha, not true. He's definitely not going to choose Riyadh. Going to choose Rafah, because the survival of the Jewish people is now hanging in the balance. So I think people don't understand the bad people, the anti-Semites, don't understand, who they're dealing with. But the Israeli people understand what we're dealing with. We are dealing with a war for our survival, and we have to fight to victory. And it's extraordinary. It's an outrage. It's appalling, right? That at this juncture in the history of the Jewish people and the struggle against the global jihad, you have forces combined in the West, in the free world, on behalf of this genocidal, freedom-despising organism called the International Jihad, led by Iran, that you would rather have them win than have freedom reign. It is appalling. And I don't know if it can be stopped, but I know it's going to be stopped in Israel. I know that this country is not going to stand for this. We're not going to allow Hamas to survive. It just can't after October 7th. And you know what? We're on the road, and we're not getting off this road. Doesn't matter how many of us are indicted. Anyway, those are my thoughts as we go to the end of Passover, our festival of freedom, right? And we'll see you later on this week and see how things look on the other side. Take care and Chag Sameach.